SoundCartel.
In this episode, forget Zoom, Skype or FaceTime. We speak to the co-founders of a great audio recording software, podcasters' new best friend.
We've read studies that have been done on this showing that the quality of the audio leads to you being perceived more professionally and people taking you more seriously.
From SoundCartel, I'm Nick Schildberger, and this is Podcasting Essentials. Welcome to episode 18 of season 4. And joining me is someone we haven't heard from for a while, our head of podcast partnerships, Chris Ashmore.
Thanks for inviting me back, Nick. It's great to be here.
Yes, it's great to have you, and you have had an almighty busy year, haven't you?
Well, SoundCartel has had a busy year. Yes, indeed, Nick. We have Business Essentials Daily that we started this year, which we're proud to have a sponsor, Mazars, on board. We have Business in Focus, a program for chartered accountants, and a whole heap of branded podcasts that keep coming in. So, we've all been busy, as you know, Nick.
Yes, I think this would be, as you've said many years, the year of the podcast, but even during a pandemic, you can probably make that claim again.
Absolutely.
But you did take time out of your busy schedule to speak to two founders of a tech startup in California.
That's right. California, where else would they be other than California as a tech startup? No, I spoke with Zachariah Marino and Rockwell Felder. They both co-founded Squadcast a few years ago, and it's been the best thing since sliced bread for professional audio studios like us, Nick.
Well, and also just for anyone in podcasting, whether you're a studio like ours or just an independent.
Absolutely.
We really value high quality audio, and they've managed to deliver an online tool that is ridiculously easy for the host and even easier for the guest. But before we get to your chat with the guys, I just want to talk about why we're so obsessed with high quality sound. And it really comes back to the simple point, which we've mentioned many times. If you're going to go to the effort to produce audio and ask your audience to tune in and listen, the least you can do is respect their time and produce the audio at the highest quality. And with tools like this, it's really not that hard. So in my opinion, if you're not producing high quality audio, you're partially lazy. And there's also 1.6 million, or even, probably more than 1.6 million podcasts out there now. So people have more choice than they know what to do with. And there are more and more high quality podcasts. So again, if you're not doing it well, people aren't going to tune in. And if you're a brand, it's a reflection of the quality of your brand. Can you imagine, Chris, a big brand in Australia producing a TV commercial filmed on an iPhone and edited by their intern? It just wouldn't happen, would it?
That's right, exactly.
And the last point is some research. It's always nice to back it up with research. The Australian National University did some research recently that showed there is a link between the quality of audio and credibility. So they got a bunch of people into a room, listened to some audio from professors, and then reduced the quality and played the same sort of stuff. And overwhelmingly, they responded that they didn't believe the professors as much when the audio quality was less. So for all those reasons, that's why we think you just have to do your best to produce high quality audio. And during this year, COVID meant that we usually do the majority of recording in our in-house studio or linking to ABC studios around Australia, but we couldn't do much of that this year, so we had to rely very heavily on remote recording. We tried so many different services and different techniques, but Squadcast is by far our favourite, and we've been using them for most of this year, so we thought we may as well get them on the show.
Well, that's absolutely right. And look, at the risk of sounding like an advertorial, and this is not what it's meant to be, I do ask Zach and Rock how people can use their software. And we talk about broader issues like getting the quality right and how the special people are not really you as the host and the guest. The special people really are the listeners. So you've got to think of them when you put together a podcast. So my first question to Rock is why they started Squadcast.
there was really no industry standard when it came to recording a podcast remotely. And it seemed like no one in the community was really happy with the options. They were just kind of putting up with it and doing what worked, whether it was Skype at the time that was the number one used option when it came to recording a podcast remotely. But Skype is a great tool for having a video chat. But when it comes to recording that in studio quality audio, that definitely wasn't their focus. So we really saw an opportunity to build something to become the industry standard. And we really saw ourselves sitting at the intersection of podcasting, but then also remote content collaboration. And with both of those continuing to rise and become more prevalent, we thought Squadcast would be well positioned to be helping a lot of folks out.
Well, for the uninitiated, what does Squadcast do?
We help podcasters connect with their guests anywhere in the world. You can connect. We've helped people record together in over 120 countries. And it's as simple as sending your guest a link to connect with you. You can have a voice and video conversation on any device, any browser, except for Safari currently, but we're working on that. And that really makes it accessible to people who are new to podcasting, or guests are oftentimes not professional podcasters. So we provide all the controls and comforts that a professional podcaster would want on the host side. But on the guest side, they really just show up and enjoy a great conversation without having to worry about their audio quality, without having to worry about equipment or recording themselves or sending a file. All of that is handled below the surface by Squadcast, and make sure everybody sounds really good, sound like they're in the same room. We have studio quality audio for everybody because of how we record and upload the audio. And that is a pretty magical experience where you connect, record, and then whenever you hit stop, your files are there ready to go for you to start your post-production workflow.
And the good thing is that you save the recordings in the cloud, and it's easy enough for the podcast host to simply download those files.
Yeah.
And the guest doesn't have to do anything, which is fantastic.
No, the guest doesn't even really need to worry about files or anything like that. Of course, there's transparency. The guest knows when they're recording and when they're not recording. But yeah, no messing around with uploading files to Dropbox or connecting this account to that. It's really just talking like you would with whoever you're connecting with. And that allows you to really focus on the conversation, the message that you want the audience to get exposed to without any of the anxiety. Because that's another piece of this, is that when you record into a cloud service or Skype or something like that, there would always be, we learned this through talking with podcasters and ourselves, our own experience, that it can be a bit nerve-wracking to wonder if you're going to get that file at the end of your session. So that's really where we have 2 patents pending here for how we record and how we upload, so we get quality and reliability. But then also we have automatic backups in addition to that. So just in case, even if that falls through, the entire conversation is recorded without any anxiety around getting that file at the end of your conversation.
And like Zoom, you're able to see the video of the person that you're speaking to, which is handy, but it doesn't record the video.
That's correct. Happy to say that's only temporary. Video recording is our most requested feature and something that we're testing internally now, and we'll start to roll out soon. And who knows, by the time this episode goes live, it already might be in folks' hands. So it's very close, but you're right. Right now, the video is just for we feel like it helps lead to a better experience. It helps build rapport and just leads to a better overall conversation that hopefully gets picked up by your listeners. And we felt like that was one of the things that Zoom or Skype was getting right. The difference is that audio quality was still less than desirable. So it's all about ensuring that the audio quality is up to the highest standards possible.
And how many people can you record in one session?
So at the moment, it's up to 4 total. So there's 1 host seat currently. That's what you are in right now. You have all the controls to start and stop the recording. And we're your guests. And like Zach mentioned, for the guests, very minimal responsibilities or features and levels of access, because we really want them focused on just showing up and having a great conversation. And as soon as you hit stop on the record button, the guest doesn't have to do anything. They're free to leave immediately after, or of course they can stick around. We always encourage some banter back and forth to nurture the relationship. There's oftentimes a lot of good relationship building can occur before and after the recording stops.
Absolutely. In terms of the audio quality, without well, we'll have to be a bit technical, but what does it record in?
Yeah, so we have the CD standard sample rates of 44.1 kilohertz and 16-bit depth, and those are available in WAV and MP3 formats for everybody in their own separate tracks in a conversation. So the three of us recording together now will each have our own set of files in those formats, and those are available, like Rock said, as soon as our session's done recording. They're available very quickly, so that way you, the host, could even do a sound check on the fly, listen to it without leaving the session, make sure everybody sounds great, and all that's transparent to your guests. So,
in layman's terms, Zach, what do you mean by sample rate, and why is that important?
The sample rate is a measurement, a metric for the quality of audio that's recorded digitally. And we record everybody locally on their device. So that's a key distinction. A lot of times where the quality can be degraded on platforms like Skype and Zoom is that the audio is, and the order is important here, that the audio is first sent over the web and then it's recorded in the cloud. With Squadcast, we do the exact opposite. We record everybody locally on their device, and then in the background while you're recording, we're pushing that up to the cloud after it's recorded in sections. So that way you get the local quality of the sound coming into my microphone with nothing else interfering with that, and then kind of the benefits of pushing it up to the cloud in the background for reliability. And then even in a worst case scenario with that setup, if power goes out or my microphone gets unplugged or anything like that, the file's already up in the cloud. So we can render that whenever you reestablish a connection, it's safe and sound there for you. So that applies to everybody in the conversation. And then to answer your question more specifically, the sample rate is like the frequency of how often your computer is grabbing a sample of the sound that your mouth is making. So that happens 44,100 times per second in our standard. And that's how sensitive our human ears are. I mean, people talk about TV screens and monitors and things like that. And that's about 60 frames per second is like the limit of what human eyes can see. Our ears are so much more sensitive than that. So Sony established that standard of 44.1 kilohertz sample rate with the invention of the compact disc. And that's really what we use to define and measure the level of quality that we offer. And then beyond that, 16-bit depth is the other metric I mentioned. So each one of those samples, 44,100 per second, each one of those samples has 16 bits of data associated with it, which is a very high fidelity. So people have heard of like 8-bit or 16-bit with like maybe it's memory on our computers or something like that. But it is 16 bits of precision when it comes to the sound of each one of those samples. So it's a very high fidelity sample of recording that we're providing. And we make all of that super easy and below the surface. So you just click record and then all that happens kind of magically below the surface.
Mm. And that's important, isn't it? I mean, we're always going on about with the brands that we speak to that good audio quality, professionally sounding audio quality reflects the professionalism of the brand. It's like if you have a newsletter that's stapled together on dirty or creased paper, that reflects your brand. You want something that's glossy, that looks good and feels good. And it's the same with audio quality. And that's why I think what you're saying, it's important to have that high quality audio in a podcast. Anyway, that's what I think.
Well, it's not just what you think. We've read studies that have been done on this showing that the quality of the audio leads to you being perceived more professionally and people taking you more seriously. So the data shows what your suspicions are thinking.
Good. Now, what do you recommend when it comes to, say, microphones and the setup at home?
Yeah, so we definitely encourage our customers to use some sort of microphone. The great thing is you don't need to spend a whole lot to get a microphone that's going to have you sounding good. But one thing we do recommend is using a dynamic microphone that's best for podcast use.
If I can add to that, we also provide a data report. We have a remote podcast stats report that we publish. We just published Q3 of 2020. And we look at what microphones we see recorded with across all of Squadcast. Blue microphones are very popular, less popular around audiophiles and people in professional recording environment, but we see Audio-Technica microphones as like a close second. Certain audio interfaces like Focusrite, we see pop up quite a bit. Different headphones, different cameras, all that stuff. Times a day people are recording. So if you're interested in that, check it out on our website. We have the remote podcast stats report that'll give you deeper insights to that question.
What microphones do you guys use?
So we're both using the same one, the ATR 2100. I believe it's discontinued now. I think it's like the ATR 21X, or there's an X involved somewhere, but it's a similar microphone. Yep. It's really durable. It's cost effective. I think under $100, maybe slightly over $100. That's all you need. And you can really take it with you on the go anywhere. And it's a microphone that's tried and tested and great for podcasting.
Mm-hmm. Zach, you mentioned the Blue microphone, which is probably the most popular from your statistics of those using it on Squadcast. Is that the Blue Yeti? Is it? Is that...
Yeah, the Blue Yeti or the Blue Snowball, I think those are two very popular devices. And I have my speculations as to why they're so popular. They're also very accessible. So you can pick them up here in the United States at Target or Best Buy, and like they're very accessible, whereas an Audio-Technica XLR microphone is not going to be on that same shelf. So I do have some speculation around that, but those are not very forgiving microphones, so I find it a bit ironic that people use them at home in not a studio environment. If you're in a studio environment and you have sound treatment like I can see in your background, then those microphones would be fantastic. You just kind of need to be careful if you're in a less sound-treated environment where it'll pick up your chair moving and if some different sounds that are in your environment, whereas these Audio-Technica microphones that Rock mentioned, they're much more forgiving for the polar pattern. That's good for our voices and good for podcast listeners.
That's it. I think Blue, they've done a good job with marketing.
And they're pretty. I mean,
they're nice.
They look good. So I think that helps.
Yeah.
It's what it's all about, isn't it?
Sometimes.
Now, according to your statistics, a good deal of people don't use headphones when they're using Squadcast, which I don't quite understand because it leads to many problems, including terrible echo when you're interviewing someone. Why do you think people don't use headphones? They just don't know?
It's certainly been a big challenge, but I think we're just kind of stuck in this moment in time where, or not stuck, but we're just in a moment in time where there's a lot of people that aren't used to connecting, collaborating, and creating content remotely. And so I don't think that it's just they don't know. They're not aware of how beneficial headphones are. I think most people have a pair of headphones, whether it's from their iPhone or something like that laying around, where even just including headphones is going to improve the quality of your show tremendously, in addition to a microphone and some of the other things we're talking about here. But I just think it's because most folks are doing what's ever convenient, and maybe they're bouncing from one meeting to the other and aren't thinking about it for whatever reason. However, the Remote Podcast Stats Report is actually going to support this, I think, where I think the times are changing. I think people are getting more acclimated and used to and understanding how important it is. And I think if you have the conversation with them and explain the why, that it's going to help your credibility, most folks are going to have no problem doing that, especially because it's not tremendously inconvenient most times to use headphones. But it was a shock to us at first and somewhat of a uphill battle to just communicate why it's important and ensure that we were helping our hosts, helping their guests to set them up for success.
Well, it's an ongoing game of educating people.
That's what we're all doing in the space. Everybody's a part-time educator and part-time whatever else they do at their day job in podcasting.
That's right. Now, we're almost coming to an end. I suppose I would like to ask you, do you have top tips for those who are looking to do remote recordings?
Yeah, there's environmental considerations. I think is something that I'm constantly trying to follow our own advice on, and silencing my cell phone and putting my bulldog away. So those environmental improvements are always within an arm's reach, and it's really useful to consider those decisions through the lens of what is the best for my audience. Sometimes it can be that it's best for me as the host or it's best for you as the guest. But I think at the end of the day, what we're producing is for our listeners and for the audience. The only other recommendation I'd have is if you have questions about microphones or what sounds good from that perspective, it can be helpful to rent a microphone and see how it sounds with your voice. So that's something where your guest, if they don't have a microphone because they're not usually doing podcasts for some reason, maybe send them like a 2-day rental. Those are things that we see over and over again. Professional podcasters that record remotely, they do those things. And it can also be a good way to affordably try out a microphone before you buy it, make sure it works with your vocal register. And that's the tip that I have.
Well said. And I think fantastic what you guys have done. The technology is wonderful.
Thank you.
What's the future for you guys? What's the future for Squadcast?
Well, thank you again for saying so. I mean, that wasn't always the case. This has been a long journey for us, and we're very proud that we can deliver. And that's our plan, is to continue delivering more forms of content creation that people can collaborate on remotely. So like Rock said a few minutes ago, we will be adding video recording here very soon. That's going to unlock a tremendous amount of creative potential from the same conversations that are already being recorded in studio quality audio today. You'll walk away from those same conversations having quality video for everybody in the conversation as well. So we've seen in the data is pretty clear that our listeners want to engage with our show across all of these different channels. And it's really good to be available wherever they are in engaging in content. So that being YouTube, that being video for social media, however you want to use those assets, I think it's really going to be exciting to see what the podcast community can do with studio quality video and audio. So I think that's in the near term. And in the midterm, I'll keep you in suspense on the long term, but in the midterm, we'll be bringing to life a collaboration with Dolby Sound into the conversation here on Squadcast, as well as a studio audience experience. So you can have another form of engagement with your listeners to the conversation as you're being recorded. And we're very excited about both of those in our near future here.
It's incredible. Well, Zach, Rock, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Good luck for the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate you having us on.
That was Zach Marino and Rock Felder, co-founders of Squadcast.
What awesome names for a tech startup, hey? Now, I assume you recorded that interview on Squadcast, of course, and we're recording right now via Squadcast, albeit with me in our in-house studio, because as you discussed, Squadcast will make the recording process easy and will capture high-quality audio, but there are still things you need to get right, one of which is a nice quiet environment for your recording. So a laptop on a high-gloss kitchen bench in the middle of your kitchen is not where you should record.
Well, that's right, unless your kitchen is made out of cushions and it's pretty small, but absolutely. I mean, look, you got to look at best practice. And Nick, you're in a recording studio. I'm in a recording studio, but not everyone obviously has the ability to get to one. If you're a brand, a big brand, you've got the money, and if you're in Melbourne, come to our recording studio in Hawthorne East and we can set you up and ensure that the quality is going to be perfect. But a lot of brands out there might not have that access. So often a bedroom with carpet on the floor and curtains that can be closed to cover the windows is far better, a far better place to record. It might not look the best on camera, but you're not doing it for looking good. It's all about the audio quality.
Well, we had a guest recently who hadn't used Squadcast, but she does some podcasting herself and she has some big, thick curtains set up in the space she records. And when she heard it was going to be a video, she said, "Oh, no, I don't want people to see my setup." And we said, "No, it's okay. It doesn't matter how it looks. It's going to sound great, and that's all that matters."
Absolutely.
The other thing I love about Squadcast is the local recording aspect of it, which means there are no internet dropouts that you might get when you try and record a Zoom call, for example. And being on separate tracks, and you might have 2 or 3 or even 4 people on the one recording, it means that you have all of those tracks separately, which I won't get technical, but in post-production, that is so much better and gives so much more flexibility.
That's right. Now, just to clarify a few things, Nick, with Squadcast, and we didn't talk about pricing, but it might be interesting for people to know what the pricing levels are with Squadcast. There are 3 pricing...
We're not working for commission.
Well, not yet. There are 3 pricing tiers that they've got. So there's the less expensive one, $9. This is US dollars, $9 for 2 hours of recording a month. There's another tier, $17 for 5 hours of recordings a month. And the more expensive is $38 for 12 hours recording a month. And the good thing is that the meter starts running only when you press record. So you could have a chat, and you probably should have a chat before you start the recording, and you can have that chat for like 30 minutes, an hour, whatever. but you will not be charged for it until you press record and until you press stop. The other good thing is that if the power goes out, you don't lose the whole recording. What's captured is up until the power goes out, so you don't have to restart that bit again. If you've recorded 30 minutes of it, you won't lose it. The other thing, they were talking about recording at 44.1 kilohertz or 44,100 hertz, which is the same sample rate as an audio CD. Now, Skype's maximum is 16,000 hertz. And it's interesting to hear Zach explaining that our ears are so sensitive and how we're so attuned to detect the very slightest discrepancies in quality.
And I think we all have had that experience when we tune into a podcast and the host sounds fantastic because they might be recorded in a studio, and then suddenly they say, I'm speaking to my guest in California, and you go, uh-oh.
Yeah.
It's a Skype call, and immediately you hear that huge drop in quality, and it's quite jarring.
Oh, absolutely. You might get used to it in that particular podcast, but again, you're comparing the low quality versus the high quality of more professionally sounded podcasts, and that's the way we're going. So, which leads me to the other thing they talked about, which is headphones. Gee whiz, use your headphones, please, people. And use headphones that cover your whole ear, if possible. Don't use the computer's speakers. And according to their stats, 56% of people doing podcasts don't use headphones. It's sacrilege.
It's a very, very simple thing, as you said, and it makes an enormous difference. A bit of a tip here. We find when we're onboarding guests for interviews that we speak to them in advance and we send them a very simple 2-page guide on what they need to do on their end to make sure that they're going to record in the highest quality. We're all about making our guests sound as good as possible. And one of those things, of course, is to say, make sure you have headphones, make sure you're using the Chrome browser. If you can plug in a microphone, then make sure you have one of those. It doesn't have to be expensive. And you don't need to worry about the technical side of things. That will look after itself. But it's really important to have all the things set up in advance. And if it's all too much trouble, then, of course, as you mentioned, Chris, we can do that all for you. And it's quite helpful to have another producer on the session as an extra set of ears to listen to the content so that the host and the guest can concentrate on what they're doing and the producer can just help listen in and check things and make sure that nothing's been missed, or if there are things that were mispronounced, they can go back and fix that up at the end of the recording.
And one final thing, Nick, Zach and Rock mentioned those podcast statistics. So we've put them in the show notes. Check it out. It's quite interesting, I think.
Terrific. Well, that's it for this episode of Podcasting Essentials. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining me. It's been a while, but it was great to have you.
And thank you, Nick, and Merry Christmas to you and, of course, to all our listeners.
Gosh, wow, it's December already. Amazing. This year has flown by. Same to you, Chris. Merry Christmas, and I look forward to having you back in the studio, hopefully face-to-face next year. To find out more about how we can help you create a podcast, check out our website at soundcartel.com.au or on the socials at SoundCartelAU. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're after business insights and inspiration each morning, check out our daily podcast, Business Essentials Daily, wherever you're listening now. From all of us at SoundCartel, thanks so much for listening.